All right. Well, once again, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're coming from. There, I want to introduce our speaker here this morning. We're fortunate to have with us Miriam Silman with Project Aware, the Trauma and Resilience Advisor for the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities. She works with the Cabinet for Family and Health and Services, and I'm gonna let her take over here, and she's got a slideshow and some great discussion stuff to talk about. So, Miriam, it's all yours.
Well, I went back on mute. Thank you so much, Quentin. And if you are having trouble hearing me, put something in the chat and we'll try to adjust. I fortunately have a really loud voice, so hopefully it will carry well for all of you. So as Quentin said, I've been working with Project Aware for the last four years, and actually been working with Project Aware for longer than that, but been working in this current role as the behavioral health lead for Project Aware for a while. And some of you may be familiar with it, others may not, but I also serve as the Trauma and Resilience Advisor. And so I'm very interested and have done a lot of work around things related to embedding trauma-informed practices in schools. And when Beth and Quentin reached out, they said that what they'd really wanted to do, and I didn't realize this was your first Wednesday webinar after a hiatus, but what they hoped that we could talk about is embedding trauma-informed practices, how FRYSCs can be a part of that in schools, and with particular attention to two things. How do you all fit into some of the requirements of the School Safety and Resiliency Act? And is there also, if you have any concerns around Senate Bill 150, which I may or may not be able to really help you with, but I think we can talk about kind of what the guidance is saying. But I'd like this to be really useful to you. And I know that a lot of you have probably had some training around trauma-informed practices in education. And so what I'm going to do periodically is I'm going to show a few things and some frameworks and then pause and ask you to feel free to unmute and to drop things in the chat about whether we should do a deeper dive or if you have any questions about this. And I have a lot of slides available. We're not going to necessarily get through all of them, but we will definitely try to focus on the things that are useful for you today. And if you have additional questions, I'm happy to provide some ongoing resources in the future. So I'm saying all of this to really encourage you to participate, to say, oh, we're good on that. We don't need so much about that, but how about this? And to really, let's direct it into the way that is going to be useful for you. So, and my background is that I've been working in the field of trauma for almost 35 years now. I was a clinician in Eastern Kentucky for many years. I also did a lot of community work, and part of that was to help get the family resource centers going in Magoffin County in the 90s, way back when. And I used to read the grant applications for the FRYSCs when you guys had to apply to become FRYSCs, when they were rolling out the money in the beginning. But I also worked at UK at the Department of Psychiatry at the Center for Trauma and Children, and then have been at the state for the last 4 years. And now I live in Lexington. I did live in Eastern Kentucky for 29 years, but now I've lived in Lexington for the last 8. So that's a little about me, and I'm going to share my screen. Wait, hang on for 1 second. I just need to make sure. Okay. All right. So let me see if I can, let's see if I can see you all. I can't see anybody. Okay, that's okay. So I can't see you. And so, Quentin, I'm going to depend on you if there's something that, that if you're not seeing or hearing or something, you're going to break in and let me know, because I can't ask people for a thumbs up or anything because I'm not able to see for whatever reason.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on it.
I'm just looking to see if there is. Hang on, I just got it. There was a mechanism. I just found it, so now I can see it a little bit, and I've got my chat up. Okay, sorry about that. Just needed to fix the setting. There we go. All right, now I got it. Perfect. All right. So I always start by reminding you that whenever we're talking about trauma, that can hit people in different ways. And so to just take care of yourself as you need to. And we're not going to do a deep dive into this today, but I always like to remind people that when we are impacted by something that we've seen or we've heard or we've been exposed to or experienced, usually the thing that's going to help us get through that is to metabolize it in some way, not just to kind of push it away and avoid it. And one of the best ways that we can metabolize it is to talk it through and to understand how it's impacting us. So just if you need to do that, I hope you have a trusted person in your life who you'll be able to do that with. But we know that, we all react differently. So I always like to remind us that there's no right or wrong way to hear this information or to respond to it, and to give you permission to take care of yourself as you need to. Let's get us going forward. So we'll talk a little bit about some frameworks, talk a little bit about what's the role of FRYSCs in the district and school trauma plans, the elements of the required elements of those plans. We'll look at the 6 elements of a trauma-informed system, which I think is a really nice way to think about how you all can be trauma-informed in your schools, and then save some time for any considerations around SB 150, as I said. So when we talk about a trauma-informed school, what are we really talking about? And it's a pretty vague concept, or it's a big concept. I shouldn't say it's vague, it's a broad concept. And so this definition from the Trauma Learning and Policy Initiative, I think, is good because it speaks to student safety and feeling welcomed and supported, and that it's a school-wide effort. And we see that being trauma-informed is part of the educational mission, not in addition to it. And one of the things that I think you all know from your work is that when we're not addressing the things that are happening in the lives of our students, then there's no way we can hope to address the academics, right? That's why FRYSCs were created. That's why you're so critical and vital for the work that we do. And so being a trauma-informed school is very closely aligned and really integrated with the work that you're doing in that way. In Kentucky, in the School Safety and Resilience Act, which was, referred to as Senate Bill 8, the SSRA gives a definition of what what the legislation means by trauma-informed approach. So they say a trauma-informed approach is incorporating principles of trauma awareness and trauma-informed practices. And they refer to the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. So the 6 principles that I'm going to share with you are those principles. But the reason that we're looking at those principles according to the legislation, and I think that this is actually one part of the legislation that's quite good, is, again, to foster a safe and stable and understanding learning environment for all students and staff. And then they added this thing saying ensuring that all students are known well by at least one adult in the school setting. So they're really prioritizing relationships. So when I think about that definition, I think about safety, stability, and relationships as being the undergirding of being trauma-informed for our schools. And I hope that you guys see immediately that, that's clearly a role for the FRYSCs in that way. One part of the School Safety and Resiliency Act that I think relates very directly to the work that you do is this requirement that every LEA has a district trauma plan. So this was very confusing because they required it, but then they didn't really give a lot of guidance other than these 5 required elements. And there's actually no mechanism for monitoring it. So if a district doesn't have it, there's nothing that happens. There's no consequence for that. But, ostensibly there could be in the future, but right now there isn't. So I'm just curious if any of you, if you can drop in the chat, if any of you are aware of your district having a trauma plan, working on it, if you were a part of it. Is this news to you? Did you know about it? Have you been a part of it? Drop some information in the chat. People aware of their district trauma plans? You're aware that you have one, and you're on the trauma team at your school. Okay. Aware and was a part a couple of years ago. Great. So the FRYSC serve on the district team, trauma and mental health team. Great. Okay. And so there's been some training. So we definitely see that there are people who are aware. And what's interesting is that sometimes you're on the school level trauma team, but what's weird about this requirement, it was a district plan, yet most of the time the teams are school level, although I see from the chat that there are some district trauma teams also. So some districts may have both a district plan and then they may have school plans. Some may just have the district plan. There are probably some where there are school level plans and not a district plan. So it may come in a variety of ways. I think it's good that you know that this is required. And, if there's an opportunity for you to participate, I always encourage anything that's happening at a district or a school level to include FRYSCs, especially around anything to do with being trauma informed. So these are the 5 elements that the legislation requires in the trauma plan. And the bolded areas I bolded because I see them as activities and elements that you all are definitely going to be a part of. So the first thing is enhancing trauma awareness. So that sometimes comes in training, and a few people mentioned training, but I also think that another way that you are raising awareness of trauma and what it means to be trauma informed is in modeling that. The way that you do what you do sets a really good example for the other people in your schools and across your district. And so I think that that is something that we should really recognize, that you serve as a very important model in that way. The second thing is around a school climate assessment, and it has to include issues around inclusiveness and diversity. The third one is around developing trauma-informed discipline policy. So if you are on your state or your district trauma team, you may be a part of that. You may not be. I'm going to give you a resource for that in just a minute that also came out of the SSRA. The third thing is this idea of collaborating with law enforcement. And the way that that has actually been interpreted is by schools connecting with law enforcement through Handle with Care. How many of your schools are using Handle with Care with law enforcement? Is that a program that you have in your schools? Yes, I'm seeing a yes. I'm seeing some yeses. Okay, I'm seeing a bold, in all caps, yes. So that's good. Not really. No, what is it? Okay. Anybody want to unmute and share about Handle with Care? Somebody who has it in their school?
I can share a little bit.
Great, Natasha, go for it.
So our resource officer, he will come to me when any kind of issue has gone on the night before. It's generally like the next school day. Sometimes it may take a couple days. But anything like, for example, I had a student, the police were called to the apartment. So it ended up just being like a noise complaint by another, but I went and called and checked in with the family. So it's just anything that's happened in the student's life that involved the police.
Exactly. So Handle with Care is a program that was actually established in West Virginia and now has been replicated in other states. And the idea is that anytime that law enforcement is called out to a situation and they have contact with students, they then alert the school, and all they say is Handle with Care. And that's the code for saying we had contact. So as Natasha said, it could be something relatively minor like a noise complaint, or it could be something very serious like a domestic violence situation or an overdose situation or a fire or an accident. And the way that it is supposed to work in theory is that there's a contact person at the school who gets this Handle with Care message, and then the school has a mechanism within the school to alert people who should be in the know about this. So it would be, for example, if if there was a handle with care on Johnny in 4th grade, then it might be that the school counselor should know that there was a handle with care, the FRYSC should know, and Johnny's teachers should know. Now, in the case of the FRYSCs, it might be that you reach out to the family. In the case of the teachers and the counselor, they may not go to Johnny and say, hey, I hear the cops were at your house last night. But what they will do is they'll pay attention. Does Johnny need some extra space? Does he need some clean clothes? Does he need to lie down? Is he super tired? Does he need some food? Does he not have his backpack? So instead of getting in trouble for not having his backpack and his homework, he's essentially given a pass because we understand maybe something happened that he literally got pulled out of his house and he doesn't have access to that. So it is eyes and ears on with a universal look at paying attention to what does this student need. And it's a universal approach because it applies to all students. Now I'm seeing from the chat that it doesn't always translate exactly the way we hoped it would, because the idea is that it's going to provide that extra level of support for the student if the student needs something during the day. So for example, if Johnny had a big test or any test, we might say, you know what, Johnny, why don't we wait? You can take the test another time, or you can skip it, or we'll help you with it, because we know that he might not be in the headspace to take a test or give a presentation if it's an older student or something like that. So the idea is that people who can support Johnny should know about it, but that may not be happening exactly as it was intended to happen. From my perspective, I would see that it would be helpful for you all as FRYSC to be some of the people who are notified about a handle with care. And so I think that if you are aware that your school has a handle with care, it might be a good time at this beginning of the year to check in and say, hey, what's the process for this? Let's make sure. And what's the backup? So if the principal is the contact, who's the second person? Handle with care actually says there should be 2 people always available to receive that message, to check that message. Sometimes it's a phone message that's automated. Sometimes it's an email that gets generated. There are different mechanisms in the way that it happens. But then you also want to check, once somebody is notified, who else is being notified, and offer yourself as, hey, you know what, I think I could be a help in that situation, probably to follow up and be some support to the student and or the family. So I think you can ask the questions about, how is our handle with care set up right now? And are you a part of it? And could you be a part of it if you're not? If you don't know if your school has handle with care or not, ask that question. And that probably is a question for the principal. And when I send Quentin the resources to follow up from this, I will put in a link to some information about handle with care so that people who aren't familiar with it have that. I will tell you that the responsibility is on the school to voluntarily sign up for it and to make sure that the contacts are updated. That is not a responsibility of law enforcement. So it is a school level responsibility. So it may be that it just needs to be updated, and obviously approach with curiosity. Hey, do we have this? And, what can we do to help, etc. All right. So that's that 4th thing. Anybody have any questions about this? Okay, I think I addressed everything that's in the chat. All right, that's the 4th one, right? And then the 5th one is this very broad statement that the trauma plan is supposed to have, providing services and programs designed to reduce the negative impact of trauma, support critical learning, and then here's where I think you really come in, foster a positive and safe school environment for every student. So the good news is that I think that pretty much everything you do now falls within the purview of this. And so to my mind, you are an essential part of implementing this trauma plan in your district, and because you're implementing it in your schools and hopefully going across the district. The lessons learned and the good examples are going across the district. I do want to tell you that KDE has an SSRA page, a School Safety and Resiliency Act page. If you scroll down on that page, what you will see is the trauma toolkit. That is another requirement of the SSRA. And in the trauma toolkit, these are the tools that are up so far. There are some more coming, but you remember that requirement in the plan that there be a trauma-informed disciplinary response. Well, there's a tool about that, and it has lots of resources. So if that is something that your school is looking to work on, or you're on a district team or a school team, I think all of these tools could be helpful, but that one in particular will relate to that requirement of the trauma plans in that way. So the other thing that I want to point out is that probably many of you are working within an MTSS system, and probably some of you think about, or your schools think about, the MTSS as starting at tier 1, and that, you know, all the students get what happens at tier 1. Some students, we usually think about 15%, it's probably more like 15 to 25% get tier 2 level interventions, and a smaller number get tier 3. But I want to point out to you that I always think about the MTSS as having some foundational pieces. So one is support for the workforce, but the other is how it embeds the school in a partnership with the families and the community. And again, I think that that's where you come in. So in order to make this MTSS work, the work that you do is very important. We often think about being trauma informed as happening at these 3 tiers also. There are many universal things we do. Then there's tier 2 and tier 3 ways that we can be supportive to kids who have experienced trauma and are reacting in ways where they need supports. I just want to give you 2 more things before we dive into the 6 things, because I think that these relate really well to what you do. Many of you have probably heard about adverse childhood experiences, and it's really important that we understand the adversities that students have been exposed to. But one of the things that, excuse me, recent literature has told us, this is a 2019 study and some more literature since then, is that what really matters and makes a difference are the positive childhood experiences that kids have in their life. Now, we've talked for a long time about protective factors, and positive childhood experiences is another way of describing protective factors. So if you're familiar with Family Thrive, and the protective factors that are in that project, or other models that use protective factors, these are really talking about the same kinds of things. The study that looked at positive childhood experiences looked at these particular 7, and you see that there are 4 that are related to school and community. And so again, the value of what you do, I think, is very powerful. And the reason that it's powerful is it turns out that these positive childhood experiences matter in 3 big ways. For kids who have had trauma, if they've also experienced these positive things, it shows that the research shows that the effect of the trauma is lessened. So even for kids who have had significant trauma in their lives, if they also are getting these positive experiences and protective factors, that trauma is not going to be as damaging for them. They're going to be more resilient and able to recover from it. The second thing that we discovered is that benefit of positive childhood experiences holds true not only for minor traumas, but also for kids who have a lot of trauma. If you know about the adverse childhood experiences study, you may remember that kids who have had 4 adversities or more showed a much more significant impact. And it turns out that even for kids who have had a lot of trauma in their lives, the impact of positive childhood experiences was really big. So that's the second big takeaway. But the third big takeaway, I think, speaks to why FRYSCs are such an integral piece of this work. And that is that it turns out that even if you haven't had adversity in your life, so the kids who have no ACEs, if they didn't have positive stuff, they weren't doing very well. In fact, some of the kids who had adversity we're doing better than the kids without adversity if those kids with adversity also had the positive things happening. So it turns out that not having the bad, yeah, we want people to avoid having exposure to the bad stuff. But if you don't have exposure to the good stuff, that's actually not okay. It turns out that exposure to the good is absolutely necessary to flourish and thrive. And so that's what you all are doing, is you're ensuring that every kid in your school has an opportunity to get some of these positive childhood experiences and protective factors, just like, and so that enhances the opportunity for what we think about as flourishing. And when you look at the qualities of flourishing, curiosity, regulation, and persistence, those are exactly the kinds of things that your teacher colleagues, that your principals and administrators want to instill in kids, because those are the ingredients for strong academic outcomes, right? So that's how all of this is connected. And you might think, well, I thought we were going to talk about trauma. Being trauma informed is also about being resilience building, because that's what really makes the difference. So this attention to the positive is a part of being trauma informed. So I just wanted to put that out there for everybody. So I'm curious to know, have you guys heard of positive childhood experiences before and the research, and does this feel like it resonates with you? You can use reaction buttons. You can say something in the chat. Okay, great. All right. So I'm seeing some folks saying yes, and seeing some hearts in the thing. Okay, great. And some thumbs up. Okay, thank you. So Shannon, I encourage you, if this is new information, and Shannon, I appreciate you being honest and saying that this is new information for you. Please do some digging into it. I'll send in, when I send Quentin, I will send a link to a new organization in Kentucky called Partnership for a Resilient Kentucky. And it's open to anybody. And we have a website with all kinds of resources that I think you'll find will help you learn about positive childhood experiences and promoting them. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. The other thing that I wanted to point you to is that when we think about building childhood resilience, this is what's called the resilience wheel, and it comes from some work that was done about 20 years ago by Ann Maston, who's kind of the grand dame of childhood resilience. And I just want you to look at the components, and I want you to notice how many things you all do with kids that build resilience. So you're part of school connectedness. You're always looking for opportunities to build self-esteem and self-efficacy, that sense that what kids do matters in the world. You're always helping them building competence, whether it's their social competencies or their academics, supporting their academics. You're always promoting peer support, and you offer family support. So out of those 7 things that build childhood resilience, you all have a direct impact on 6 of them. And so, yeah, I counted right, 6. Sorry, I thought I had miscounted. So I just, again, say this to say that, like, there are so many ways that you are already, just with your presence and the services that you do, being trauma informed. But let's look at some strategies now that might help you deepen your way of promoting these 6 principles. So the first thing I want to ask you is these 6 principles of safety, and by safety, we mean both physical safety, but primarily psychological safety. And then trust and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and equity. I guess my first question is, are there any things here that feel like they're not a part of what you do already? Because when I think about FRYSC, I think, oh yeah, this is exactly the work that you guys do. Yes, Dan, you will get a copy of the presentation. I have more slides than we're going to use, so I'm going to give you the ones that we end up using. So is there anything on this list that you're thinking, oh gosh, I haven't really thought about that as a FRYSC? Anything that feels new? Let's see if it feels like this relates to what you're doing. Give me a thumbs up in your reactions. Okay, I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. Great. Okay, now I want to ask you, and so I want you to either drop in the chat or unmute. Which one of these do you feel like we should focus on to think about some strategies? Where are the places, like there may be some things that you feel like, oh yeah, I'm pretty good on that. Like I feel pretty good, but some things that you're thinking, I would like some more strategies for what to do to be more trauma informed. So either unmute or drop something in the chat about which one of those topics you'd like to talk about a little more. Empowerment. Okay. Thanks, Becky. And peer support. Okay. Collaboration, peer support. Okay. Trustworthy and transparency. Okay, great. So I'm seeing a lot around the empowerment, voice and choice, the collaboration. And so in order to get there, I'm going to start us by talking a little bit around just giving the foundation of safety and trust and transparency, because I think that that safety is actually the foundation. And if you can get to psychological safety, or you're working on psychological safety, that helps with everything else. So I think that you guys have probably talked about this, and psychological safety and trustworthiness and transparency are connected. When we think about safety, this is what I want you to think about in terms of psychological safety. And this is kind of a high level definition, but I think when we look at it, it'll make sense. It's the ability to be safe with oneself, not just with others. And what that means is that kids need to feel like they have enough control in their world, both internally and externally, that it's okay for them to not always have to be on high alert, right? When we don't trust the outside world, then we have to be in defense mode all the time. And when we're in defense mode, then we don't actually feel like we have the ability to develop other parts of ourselves. Now, none of this is conscious, of course, but when we're in defense mode, that's when you have kids who have externalizing behavior problems, or they withdraw, right? And they're not engaging. And so for me, when you drill down to what's really at the heart of most kids who are struggling in school, if we can address this sense of safety and help them feel safe with themselves, that they trust themselves to be able to navigate whatever is happening in their world, that then they can start to engage and have fun and learn new things and make friends. But until they feel that sense of safety, they can't. And so part of what we want to think about doing with safety is, of course, creating environments that feel safe. And psychological safety comes from environments that are predictable and consistent and stable. That goes back to that safe and stable in the definition from the SSRA. And where kids learn how to express what they're feeling, they learn how to identify what their emotions are, so that they don't always just say that they're mad, right? Lots of kids come to school and the only emotions they know are happy, which they don't feel very often, or mad, which is where everything else gets lumped into. So sad is mad, and confused is mad, and overwhelmed is mad, and frightened is mad, right? And so we have to start to teach them all these different language words and vocabulary. And we teach them how to start to regulate their own behavior, how to learn to calm down when they need to calm down. So I know that you guys know some of these things. And so when we can do these things, then we can get to building that sense of trust, right? And as they start to trust themselves because they're trusting the environment, those two things build. So the more they can trust the people in their environment and the place, school, then the more they start to be able to learn to trust themselves. So the two things work together. And the more they trust themselves not to lose control, not to get into a situation that's going to be dangerous, the more they start to trust other people. They build on one another in that way. All right, close your eyes because I'm going to flip through some slides really fast. Sorry. Oh, I do want to show you this. One of the things that we know about safety is that relationships build safety. And so your relationships with kids in your school, even kids who you may not see a lot, but they may still be powerful. But look at this data. This was from the 2019 YRBS, which many of your schools probably participate in because it's a requirement of schools that have family resource and youth service centers to be eligible. And so some years your schools get picked. But look at the connection between grades and relationships. So the bottom line is the number of kids who said that they did not have a trusted adult in their lives. These are high school kids. So when of the group of kids, the 31% who said they did not have a trusted adult in their life, of the kids who said they did not have a trusted adult in their life that they could talk to, 31% of them were getting D's and F's, right? So you can see how for that group, they skewed towards not doing well academically. And then for middle school students who said that they had at least one person in their school they could talk to, look at that, 70% of them were of the kids who had A's said that there was somebody in the school that they could talk to. Whereas for the kids who were not doing well, only half of them, less than half, said that they had somebody in the school they could talk to. So the power of relationships for academic outcome is really, really important. Okay, now close your eyes. I'm gonna, oops, sorry, forgot that there was all of this in here. I'm getting to trust and there was a lot in that safety in case there was something that somebody wanted. Let's get to trust and, sorry. Here we go. Trustworthiness and transparency. So look again. Part of what builds trustworthiness and transparency is also those elements of safety, predictability, and consistency, but also honesty. So what does that mean for adults in a school? What it really means is sometimes saying when we don't know what's going to happen or we don't know the answer to something. Other ways that we build trustworthiness and transparency is through confidentiality and through also showing kids that we mean what we say. So that fifth bullet of doing what you say and say what you do. We have to be really careful because kids who've experienced trauma or adversity are super attuned to this. I always say they have extra sensitive BS detectors. They know when we are not able to, when we're not telling the truth, right? And so we have to be really vigilant about being honest. And if we don't know the answer to something, we have to say, I don't know. I need to find out, or I don't think I can get that answer, right? I'm not somebody who has that information, but we also can't promise to do things that won't come true. So we have to be really careful and say, you know what, I will try to help you with this. I don't know what's going to happen, as opposed to saying I will, or I promise I will, right? Because that's a way that we can build that trust and transparency. And this is a really important modeling that you can do for other adults in your school. I'll also point you to the idea of apologizing when things don't go well, giving advance notice for kids who get triggered by fire alarms or other kinds of activities, and figuring out a way that you can help them. So that's a little bit about trust and transparency, but I want to flip us ahead to talking about empowerment. So this idea of empowerment, it comes from our understanding that one of the things that helps build resilience is feeling like you matter in the world. So empowerment, voice, and choice is all a part of that. And you guys do this, you just may not use the language of empowerment. The way that you do that is that you find the strengths in the kids who you're working with, and you point them out to their teachers, and you point them out to their families, and you find ways for them to nurture those strengths. So for the kids who don't really fit in anywhere, you find a way for them to feel like they have a role in the school and they're able to give something to other kids in the school, and people say thank you or they notice. And all of a sudden this kid has a role, right? They may be really socially awkward, or maybe they're even autistic in some way, but you find a way for them to connect. That's empowering for them, and it's building on their strengths, right? When you're helping kids build up their skill in areas that they're struggling, that's empowering for them in that way. When you're listening to them and you're giving them a voice and you're saying, I hear you, even if you can't do something about it, but you're saying, I'm really sorry that you feel that way, that's empowering. So I think that you're doing empowerment in a lot of ways that you may not call it that. I want to point to the last bullet, that idea of believing in the potential of the kids. I think that's one of the gifts that FRYSC staff always have, and that kids and families pick up on. And so I think that that's very powerful, and I want you to own that and know that you do that. When we think about voice, there are lots of ways that you can help students find their voice. And this is probably going to be more true for upper levels, middle and high school, but supporting them with having a voice on your council, supporting them with having a voice or creating a student or a youth council in your school to advise your center. And that could happen even for elementary school kids. You may not have kindergartners on it, but you may have fourth graders, on it, or fourth and fifth graders, depending on how high up you go, and sixth graders. In the upper levels, there are ways that you could support, and you could work with or student-led organizations like the Kentucky Student Voice Team to do a student-led climate audit. That would meet your requirement for doing a climate audit in your school, but it's a student-led mechanism, and it's a really beautiful way that they do that. So I'll also put that in the resources that I send to Quentin afterwards. Making sure that your school has a grievance policy and that the students and the families know about it is a way of empowering and giving voice in that way. And then also asking students for input, but not just collecting the information, making sure you're telling them, hey, this is what you told us, feeding the results back to them in that way. Choice, I think, is something that schools don't do enough of, although I think you do plenty of it. But choice matters, and choices can be small, and choices only needs to be two things, right? So if you say, when somebody comes into your office, if you say to them, hey, what can I help you with today? You're giving them a choice about what to share with you. But if you also say to them, if they're coming in to sit down, you say, which chair would you like to sit in? Or do you need a glass of water? Or do you need a snack? Or, would you like something to draw with while we're talking? Those are giving them some choices. We need to help teachers see that there can be more choices in school, right? That they don't have to prescribe everything, because one of the things that we're finding is that kids need practice making decisions. Otherwise, they get to be teenagers and they don't know how to make choices. They don't know how to evaluate their options, right? And so sometimes, for example, if you're helping kids with homework, you can say to them, okay, what do you want to do first? That's a choice. Do you want to do math first or reading first, right? Or if they have a task to do, you can say, what order do you want to do these tasks in? Give them some control. That's both empowering and giving them a choice, and it's ultimately also giving them some voice. Does this make sense to people? So I think that these are things that you already do, but you haven't thought about it in this way. And that once you think about it, you can see opportunities to do more of it. I have pronouns on this list, but now you don't have that option. Sorry. This was an old slide. I need to change that in this way. Okay. Let's talk about collaboration for a minute, this idea of collaboration and mutuality. So one of the things that's interesting about being trauma informed is that it doesn't just say collaboration, it says collaboration and mutuality. And mutuality means that we equalize the contribution, so that when we're collaborating, it's not the assumption that one person has more power and control than somebody else. Now, in schools, the reality is that adults have more power than kids. However, when we collaborate, if we really want to help kids, we need to, in that moment, give them an equal opportunity to have voice. Now, we may not be able to honor what they say. They may say, well, I don't want to have to take math this year, or I don't want to have that teacher. There may be nothing we can do about it. They have to have math. They have to have that teacher. But part of collaboration and mutuality is giving space for them to say that, and then to say, okay, we hear you, and here's why this is the way it is. So how can we make this as tolerable for you as possible, right? And letting them then dig a little deeper to find out why it is they don't like math, or what it is about that teacher who they don't like. And maybe then you all can help to facilitate a better relationship, or maybe help to change them into a different class if it feels like it's not a winnable situation. But so collaboration and mutuality is really about making sure that we treat people with respect, and that we really, really honor the idea of collaboration in practice, not just in name. Now, I think that FRYSCs, out of everybody in schools, do this probably as well as anybody. Adults and kids, as I said, the adults usually have more power, and they usually use more power. So sometimes we think, okay, we've heard this from the kid before, we don't need to hear it again. But you know what? Sometimes that child needs to be able to say that in that moment, and we have to listen and say again, you know, I hear you, and I heard you the last time you said it, and I'm going to have to say again, this is what the limits are, right? But that's part of the collaboration of making things happen. Another part of collaboration is closing the loops, giving them that feedback, so that when you get information, or when you are saying you're going to investigate something with a family, as much as possible, getting back to that student or family and saying, hey, this is what I found out. And sometimes it is, I'm really sorry, there's nothing I can do about that. But instead of giving them no answer, because no answer to families in need, and especially to students in need, means that they don't count, that we disappeared them, right? Or we canceled them in some way. And that's not what's happened. It may be that you're busy, or that you don't have an answer, or you don't have a happy answer, but we have to close that loop, because we never know how people are taking that in. So does that help with collaboration and mutuality a little bit? Let me have people unmute, or put something in the chat. Again, it may be more of a different way of describing things that you're already familiar with. Yes. Okay. So I'm seeing a yes from Jody. Thank you, Jody, on that. Okay. So I want to make an offer to you, which is that I'm going to share the slides with you for sure. I'm going to share some resources with you for sure. To Quentin and Beth, I will be happy to come back if there are deeper dives about particular things that that the group decides or you think would be useful for that. I want to spend a little bit of time now looking at talking about Senate Bill 150. So I'm going to stop sharing because I don't have particular slides for this. I do want to make sure, oh, actually, I am going to share one thing. I do want to make sure that people know that KDE has issued guidance. Are you guys aware of the guidance that KDE has issued for the last round of legislation? Does everybody know about that? It looks like this. So it looks like this at the front. And if you Google Senate Bill 150 KDE guidance, you will come up with it. You'll see it. And so it's got a lot of bills. And then the last one is Senate Bill 150. And so there's about 4 pages on Senate Bill 150. So that's a really important reference for all of this new legislation for you to have. This is coming from KDE, so it's particularly geared towards, schools and teachers. But they also, I will point out to you, they go section by section. But they do say at one point, and I'm going to highlight it right here, KDE is no longer able to provide guidance to schools and districts related to the use of requested pronouns. So they basically didn't offer anything more than what the legislation says. They do cite a case that pretty much says that legislation can't stand, that individual rights would supersede that, but that remains to be seen how it's going to happen in Kentucky. So I will make sure that you have a link to that document also. So I want to open up the floor and say, what are your concerns? Where do we, or if you don't have concerns about Senate Bill 150, that's fine. Is there anything that we can talk about for a minute? Or any other general questions? You've been very quiet. So one of the things that I think, okay, I see somebody coming on screen. Ashley, do you want to say something? Go for it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the one thing that our district has kind of had concerns about for elementary school is the hygiene talks that we typically do. Typically, we separate the boys and the girls in third, fourth, and fifth and just give them a very general how to clean yourself. And then we do mention to the young girls that they might be starting their menstrual cycle. We don't go into detail, but just to prepare them and provide them with like a feminine pad. And so how to approach that now with SB 150.
Yeah. And so I think that there's two things that are happening. If your district has decided that they will do that, they must get active parental consent. So that means that something is going to have to go home to the parents, and they're going to have to say, yes, they can participate in it. So this is going to present a problem, because not all parents see the things that go home from their kids, and not all kids bring the things back from their parents. There might be some creative ways to do this. I think that probably you all are going to be tapped heavily for follow-up on this, about, tracking parents down and asking permission, because the kids who you really want to make sure get that talk may also be the kids for whom you don't get the active consent. So that's going to be the difference, I think, for you all, in that it doesn't necessarily change what you can say. It changes who can receive the information, and it just requires that active consent. Some school districts are reading. So there was this big, this is going to be fixed this year, but there was this big thing about the word "or," and the way the legislation was passed was actually not the way they intended it. And it made it look like you could choose one or the other. You could choose to do education broadly, or you could choose to not do it for kids younger than fifth grade. Anyway, it was this complicated thing. So some schools may actually be saying for this year, they're not going to even go into this area. But for, I don't think that's a good choice, because I think we need to, for a whole bunch of reasons, just say this is part of the work of schools, and we got to do it. And so we're going to do it, and stop making it difficult for us, because this is important. But I don't know if that's going to be heard. But I think if you're doing it, I don't think you have to change your curriculum. It's the who receives the curriculum. Because you're not talking about sexuality. You're not talking about sexual relationships or anything like that. That's where it gets tricky. Yeah. Okay. Other questions. So one thing that I imagined, I know we only have 2 minutes, so I'm just going to throw this out there. I imagine that people are a little bit concerned about what happens if a student comes to them and tells them that they're questioning or trans. Is that a concern that people have, especially at the middle and high school level? Yes, a few people are saying yes. Okay. So here's my take on this, but you definitely want to talk with your school counselors and your school principals about this. We cannot, okay, Jan's got a nice suggestion in the chat. So an alternative way for doing it. So that's a good thing to notice. Okay. But to my point about what happens when a student comes to you, legislation and schools cannot control what students say, right? And we don't want them to do that. Like, that's beyond the scope of what we do. So students are going to come, and they already do come and tell you all kinds of things that are sometimes not appropriate, or sometimes you can't do anything about. If a student comes to you with those two particular things, as a family resource center, youth service center person, as a FRYSC person, your job is to find out what that means to the student, in the sense of, is this distressing or not? So what you want to know is this okay with them? Are they comfortable with it? Are they stable? Or is it destabilizing them, or part of some larger issues that are causing depression or anxiety or something else to go on? So my advice would be to hear what they have to say, to remind them that that's not really something that you talk to them about. Are they okay with it, or do they need something? Is this making them depressed or anxious in some way? And then at that point, you can make a referral for depression or anxiety. Now, you always are alerting caregivers when you're making those referrals, and so you would continue to do the same. I think that where it gets a little tricky, and you're going to have to talk to your board attorneys about this, is if the original reason that the kid came to you was for a question around an issue around questioning or trans issues, but you are recognizing that this is part of depression or anxiety, and you are saying this kid is experiencing depression or anxiety, are you bound to tell the parent that the questioning or trans issue is a part of the depression or anxiety or not? That's where I think you need an interpretation from your board attorney. I would argue, as a behavioral health person, that you could get away with just making the referral for depression or anxiety, but I want you each to check on that. And that would be the question I think that you would have. If the kid says, I'm fine with it, then it's a non-issue, right? Again, you can't control what the kid says to you. You just have to be careful what you say back. And you're not engaging in a lot of like, specifically affirming talk. You're just saying, thanks for sharing, or, what else is going on in your life, or whatever. But if it's a problem, then you do have some responsibility to address that, the impact of the problem. And obviously we also are always going to make sure that a kid's not suicidal in that way. So that would be my advice on that situation. I don't think that it really changes your role in making referrals, as you already have been, because you were always contacting caregivers anyway. So we're over time, sorry. I want to say thank you to you guys for having me come. I am happy to come back and talk to this group or other groups, so please feel free to reach out. I'm in the ky.gov global, and I just want to say thank you for the work that you do. You guys are the linchpins that keep things rolling in the schools. Schools would not be able to do what they do without you, so I'm really grateful.
All right. I want to make sure to say thank you, Miriam, for all of that information. Wonderful job. A lot of great information there, and we're definitely appreciative to have you on here today. I want to make sure to say thank you to Beth Martin as well. She's on here for setting this up. And thank you for those of you who joined us. I'm going to hit stop on the recording, and then I'll do some of the housekeeping notes.